you sometimes have to go a long way out of your way in order to come back a short distance correctly. Those of us who've been around for quite a long time will understand that this idea has some implications for what we're talking about this evening. Way back, before the Children Act, custody and access were the, I was going to turn my sound off. Custody and access were the words that were used to describe arrangements for children. It was thought quite rightly by the Law Commission, taken up by Parliament, that the words custody and access, both of which are loaded with entirely appropriate connotations, entirely inappropriate connotations of possession and property and chattels, should go. And so they went, and we moved on to parental responsibility and Section 8 orders, residence and contact. And it was thought that the world would change, but it didn't. People still stubbornly kept on using the word custody and access for a decade and more. And so we came to the Family Justice Review in the early part of this century. And it was decided that another attempt to change the language should occur to lower the temperature, because people had got used to fighting, another word, in court to determine whether they should have a residence order or only a contact order. So there was a gold and a bronze level to be had. So it was decided in the Family Justice Review, and Parliament took this up with the Children and Families Act 2014 to do away with residence and contact and to bring in child arrangements orders. And as you know, there's even some form of grading within that. The use of language and the way we as professionals talk about the arrangements for children that parents need to make when they separate is important. It reflects how we see the difficulties that they have, and is easily picked up. And once picked up, if it's the language of combat, which it largely still is, that feeds in wholly inappropriately and counterproductively to the way they approach the time that they have before the court, and more importantly, the way they approach the relationship they have with the other parent, and the way they approach the discussion about resolving any disputes. And so as part of the Family Solutions Group and its wider work and the production of their excellent report, What About Me, in the middle of 2021, thought was given to how we could have a bespoke project to look at the use of language, and out of that grew the Family Solutions Language Group. At the same time, the Pathfinder pilots, which were being developed by the wider private law working group that I had asked to be set up, were going live. And as you know, they went live nearly a year ago now. And one of the key things that they had as their core activity was to change the language that they use. And those of you who have had any feedback from the Pathfinders in North Wales and also in Bournemouth will know that those who are working in those courts have really had a very striking experience of just how the different use of language impacts on the parties. I'm not going to give you lots of detail, but a key message is that the model of working has CAFCASS and CAFCASS Cymru undertaking a far more detailed and in-depth assessment of the issues in the case before the very first hearing. And rather than producing a safeguarding letter or a Section 7 report, what they produce is a document called a Child Impact Report. And so the conversation, and it is a conversation at the first hearing between the judge and the two parents, is not about allegations and counter-allegations and Scott schedules and other matters. They get together and say, well, we've got this child impact report now, and this report shows the impact that what you two are discussing and disputing about is having on your child. And the conversation then moves on with the parents to how are we going to lessen the impact on your child? how are we going to arrange matters in the future that reduce the impact on your child? And by just changing that language, and obviously changing the focus, but using the language so that they focus on what they're doing to the child rather than what they want to do to each other in the court process, has been really quite striking in its effect. They have very few fact-finding hearings now, and the level of cases that end up with some form of resolution at an early stage is far higher than ever was the case. Those of you who are mediators know exactly what I'm talking about, and this is bread and butter to you, but it hasn't been something that we in the court have thought about. Another example of the fact that you have to go out of your way a long way to come back a short distance correctly is the lessons that we've learned in FDAC. The FDAC, the Family Drugs and Alcohol Court, again has a different way of judges and professionals talking with parents. It's far more cooperative and far more focused on addressing problems rather than litigating in an inter parte way between the local authority and the parents. And those who sit in FDAC courts are trained in the use of language. And we have trained the judges who now sit in the Pathfinder pilots in Wales and Dorset with the people who train the FDAC judges. So bit by bit, the penny is dropping, that language is important. And so following on from the Family Solutions Group main work, I was very pleased that Helen Adam took up my suggestion that she formed a small group to look at the use of language and what we can do about it. And they, as you will know, have produced a report. And it's a very good report. It's certainly not a short document with just a list of words that we could use instead of the words we use now. Yes, it has that. It has that at the back. But the narrative, which isn't long, but it's very thoughtful, explaining why this is important and why some words are inappropriate and others are much more beneficial, really is the important part of the document. The list of words flows from the narrative. This seminar is aimed at pulling out and highlighting quite a bit of that report. For me, as president, I want to do all I can to bring about a change in the way we use language in the court. But this is not the stuff of a practice direction or a rule change. I cannot say that from the 1st of March, we will now all say these words and not the other words. It involves a change of culture. People have got to get it in their head and internalize it in their way of working. So reading the report is important because that's part of how the penny drops for you, just as it has done for me. And then we've got to get used to speaking in this way. I'm very happy to issue practice directions and change rules if that will help. Certainly the use of the word versus, which was highlighted at the first of these workshops. So it's Kramer versus Kramer, or Kramer v. Kramer, as the Americans would say. And the court list presenting the cases as Kramer v. Kramer on the outside is an obvious target that can be changed administratively so that we avoid doing that. But in the end, this will only come to pass if each of us individually in our heads get it and change our practice. Thinking back to the long way out of the way to come back a short distance correctly, once you get into the home straight, which we are now, and you talk about these things and hear them described, it's blindingly obvious, isn't it, that the language we have been using isn't appropriate and only goes to stoke the minds of people who are in a competitive mindset rather than direct them in a different way. I hope that in 2 or 3 years' time, we'll all have got it and have moved on. Again, as president, the good news about this is that it's cheap. It doesn't cost anything for we all to change the way we speak. It costs a bit to get the information out there, but it doesn't involve massive training programs, doesn't involve parliamentary time, changing the law, building the courtrooms in a different way. It's just a matter of speaking in a different way. It couldn't be easier to describe. And once we get used to it, it couldn't be easier to do in life. We've all lived through periods where we have to change the way we describe various things in quite an adept way and quite quickly. So this is doable. It really is doable. So thank you for turning up for this virtually turning up for this evening. I hope what I've said has shown my enthusiasm for this topic. It goes to the root of what we do. That's why changing custody and access was necessary, and why the other changes we've made down the way have all been chipping away at this. But now the picture is presented so that we can see the whole range of really quite small things we can do, each of which feeds into the bigger message, which is that this is not a custody fight. It's a coming together of parents to work together to reduce the impact of on their children and help them resolve their issues about the arrangements for their children in as low temperature and child-focused way as possible. So that's all I want to say, but I'll stay on the meeting and listen intently and maybe have a few things to say at the end. Thank you.
Marvellous. Thank you so much, Sir Andrew. I love that. You've said it's blindingly obvious, it's cheap, and it's quite clearly a no-brainer. So we should all be doing it. But it's a funny thing. I mean, you know, many of us have been in family law and working with families who separate for decades, and one becomes accustomed to language. It's almost you have to sort of step outside it and see it afresh, to think afresh. And I think I'm going to say just a few words now about paper itself, just because I'm conscious that we're talking about this paper, but there'll probably be quite a few people here who haven't seen it. So I'm going to do a fairly brief summary. Please do put thoughts, ideas, feedback, criticisms, anything in the chat. We are going to say, well, this meeting is being recorded. We will keep the chat. We want this to be interactive. Please use the chat freely as much as you like. So I think as I start, I just want us to be clear about why we're looking at language and why it matters, because we have wonderful laws these days, and yet the language of family law was embedded into our cultural language many years ago. And if you think over the last 100 years how society has changed, used to be that family was a white heterosexual couple with Christian values. And now we live in a multicultural society with all manner and shapes of blended family structures and faiths and values. It used to be that family separation was seen through the lens of fault, where a separation was somebody was to blame. But thankfully, we now are in more enlightened times and have a much deeper understanding of the complexity of relationships. We've left behind any notions of fault. Our attitude to children has changed dramatically. It used to be that children would be seen and not heard. And now we're aware of their need to be consulted, and we in our sector place a great emphasis on the voice of the child, but that has not permeated into our language in any shape or form. And I think critically, for me, the most important thing in a way is that our scientific knowledge has changed. Our scientific knowledge about the way children are impacted by conflict between their parents. And Katie, if we could have that slide, we've got a slide here which shows a very succinct summary of the research by Professor Gordon Harold at Cambridge University, he and others. Now, I'm not going to ask you to read all that because that is too much. These slides will be available to you afterwards. And if anybody wants this full slide as an A5 sheet with the bibliography, really email me. I'm delighted to provide it to you. But I want to highlight really just 2 bullet points here. The third one says, high levels of conflict between parents are shown to have many poor outcomes for children: anxiety, depression, academic failure, substance abuse, conduct problems, criminality, peer problems, and adversely affected brain development. Patterns of conflict can even pass on to the next generation. It's pretty serious. And the other one is that, by contrast, actions designed to reduce the level of conflict are associated with positive long-term outcomes, improvements in mental health, behaviour, school outcomes, and long-term relationships. And yet, look, this is how lawyers describe their fellow professionals. These are the accolades which we give each other in our profession to uphold their brilliance. It makes no sense. And I would say that promoting the language of war between parents is actively harmful to children. We now have the science to show it. Hence, the paper being called Language Matters. It does matter because the words we use shape our mindsets, which in turn affect how we think, and that in turn affects how we behave. And so we need to use language which promotes the right mindsets. It's all about what we want our words to lead people to think. We want to promote mindsets away from adversity and battles towards well-being, away from fear towards safety, away from a language of rights, parental rights, towards thriving childhoods, and away from retrospective blaming, looking backwards, and looking future focused towards solutions. And for the children of parents who separate, we want to promote mindsets which enable them to enjoy close relationships with both parents wherever it's safe to do so, to have a childhood which is free from conflict between parents, to be consulted when decisions are made which affect them, and to thrive in childhood, whether parents are together or apart, to thrive in childhood. These are the positive mindsets which we need to be promoting by our language. And we need this appropriate language everywhere, at the school gate, with family and friends, in the media, everywhere, government websites, support services, and through any legal process. But the advice that we've had from the language experts, the Frameworks Institute have been kind enough to give us some help, is that just flip back one slide for a moment if you can. If you start at the top of the system, it will feed back into the rest. So if we start by changing the language of the legal system, it will feed back through support service, government websites, media, family, friends, school gate. But unless we get the language right in our world, then the language at the school gate isn't going to change. So we have been advised, and we believe that if we can change the language, it will filter out to others. Obviously, others need to play their part along the way, but it needs to start here. Okay, so the president has said that he asked us to put together something. Well, I mean, how does one do that? So what we did was we threw out just literally a blank question to all these different people who work in this sector in various different contexts, and said, just tell us your thoughts about language. Literally blank piece of paper. And we had a lot of really helpful feedback, particularly from the Magistrates Association. We appended their report to our paper. It's really worth having a look. But they all fed back their thoughts. It was incredibly helpful. And some of them may be here on the call now, and I really want to thank you for the input you gave us. We also looked very carefully at the FJYPB Mind Your Language paper, and there were some very clear themes that came from them. I'm not a case or a number, I'm a person, this is my family. I'd like to be referred to by my name. These proceedings are about my life, and please don't use acronyms because I don't know what they mean. Now, quite a bit of the FJYPB paper was actually aimed at public law, but also private law. Obviously, we're looking as well at the whole space for families who separate, who don't go anywhere near a court. So we need to get language right from the moment of separation all the way through. So, not surprisingly, there were some very clear overlaps, and we summarized them into 5 principles for language to change. We called it the 5 Ps just because it's easy and alliterative. The first P is plain English. We need to use language which families understand. Now, that's obvious. They need to understand what's being said, but there's another reason, which is that when families separate, it often, it follows a relationship breakdown. It is normal for things to be a bit tricky. It's normal for parents not necessarily to agree on everything. It is normal for emotions to be running high. And what we don't want is the normality of difficulty and challenge to be turned into legal issues by using legal terminology. So I would say that using plain English to describe what is actually happening is important without attributing unhelpful legal labels to what many hundreds of thousands of families go through. So plain English essential. Personal names, obviously, we need to use names which focus on the family members rather than attribute them with legal labels. Legal labels are unhelpful and they dehumanize them. And they also insulate those working in the system from the reality of the human beings involved, if we're thinking about applicants and respondents. So we need to use names and we need to check with people how they would like to be referred, but it needs to be personal. Now, the third P, I'm very grateful to Sam and Harry from the divorce surgery and the work they did with their chambers and quorum. They came up with proportionate. There's a difference between family cases with serious safeguarding issues where formal language may well be needed, and other cases in which family members may simply have a different view about something, what day that their child should stay with them or other issues. These other more simple issues need language that is proportionate to them, which will dial down hostility, accommodate different narratives, and make space for nuance. It needs to de-escalate rather than escalate family issues, while retaining the more formal language for those more serious matters that need to come before the court. Now, the fourth one is one that I think every single respondee focused on, which is the need to encourage problem solving rather than battle mindsets. Battle language leads to aggression and defensiveness, and disarming our vocabulary is essential if we are going to promote mindsets which are open to problem solving rather than positions. And it reflects the move that we're inviting parents to do, to move away from a language of parental rights to parental responsibility. We have to promote the continuing responsibility that both parents have without hierarchy to provide for their child's well-being for the years ahead, and to lead them away from that tug of war mentality where they're pulling against each other, the language of a custody battle. We want to promote that shared responsibility for their child's well-being. And so within this problem-solving mindset, it becomes possible to reframe issues between parents to be from the child's perspective and promote a problem-solving approach. So I think that's really important, to abandon the language of battles and war. And the fifth P is about positive futures. I think that the family court delivers law and litigation, which is wholly different from every other court and litigation that we have in our society, because every other that I can think of, although I'm sure some of you will correct me now, but everything that I can think of is about looking at what has happened and redressing something, putting something right after what has happened. Family law is all about creating positive futures. We may have to understand a bit of family context and what's happened, but the goal is to create futures where family members will thrive, where there are resources to meet needs, and where arrangements work well for children and children can thrive. So I think that positive futures is actually quite an important one to shift our clients' thinking away from who did what, to think about what would they like for the future. So there were some specific call outs. I've mentioned some of them: battle language, and Sir Andrew has also mentioned the versus, Kramer versus Kramer, the other side, my opponent, fighting for my rights, all of that. Terrible, terrible. Custody, we never use it, do we, in our sector, but most of our clients do. And in the publicity that has surrounded the fabulous judgment that was published just a few days ago, was it last week? The heading in the newspapers is all, judge writes to boys in custody battle. That's the heading that's given to that piece of news. Makes me wince every time. Contact, I mean, horrifically sterile term for the incredibly precious thing, a child's time with a parent. So those are obvious ones. Perhaps more controversial or less obvious, the language of positions and position statements. A position is an adversarial word where you set your marker against something else, and we would much rather we encourage people to think about their approach, which leaves the door open to consider somebody else's approach and work together, and maybe a statement of common agreement. We've said quite a lot about position statements in our glossaries at the end of the paper. And another one, which is absolutely second nature to all of us, is dispute. People that don't work in the law tend not to talk about disputes. They may have conflicts or arguments or disagreements. They may have problems. They have issues to resolve. But a dispute turns it into something more legal. So these are all thoughts which are open to debate and discussion. Our paper concludes with 4 glossaries, which are quite long. I'm not going to go through them in any shape or form, but I'd encourage you to have a look and see what you think. There are suggestions. The language of court in written form, the language of court which is spoken, the language used by solicitors, and the language used by families, children, and the wider public. And I'll just show you a slide just to kind of give you an example of how we've done it. We've set out tables where we literally just put on one side current language and then some suggested alternatives. So moving on, we finish our paper really by looking at some thoughts for change, and that's really what we want to spend the rest of this webinar talking about. What are the words that are difficult? How do we need to change them, and how can those changes happen? And we may well, you know, feedback some ideas afterwards. There were some ideas that came from a workshop that took place a couple of weeks ago. Clearly, there needs to be political responsibility for the whole cohort of families who separate, but we're waiting for that. Public education, again, waiting for that. The President's given his comments about guidance, a rule change, court forms, court headings. That's exciting, the idea of getting rid of versus. And it's exciting to hear him talk about, you know, what we can learn from the Pathfinder pilots, the child impact report and the language around that, and also all the learning from the EFDAC, and the importance of training judges, magistrates, and all family practitioners about language and why it matters. I think there's a huge conversation to have about the legal directories. I think the accolades of war are just wholly unacceptable. And I think we as a profession need to change the perception of what a good family practitioner looks like. And I would be, Sam and Harry have actually written a brilliant article in Counsel magazine just recently, and they talk about, you know, the challenges at the bar of thinking about how you develop your career and apply for Silk if actually your application is based only on your court CV, and where is the credit given for a fabulous, brilliant practice of successful settlements, and should we be having case reporting on an anonymized basis of significant settlements, and should there be a kind of established profession of family solutions or family settlements that is separate from the directories and the court work. So these are all thoughts. I hope that's given you a flavour. We want to hear from you now, and I'm going to hand over to Nicole. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. There's obviously something about this subject, family, the language used in family separation, that moved you all to come and join this discussion. And we're absolutely delighted that there are over 200 people, all of you here, who were moved to join this discussion. For me personally, when I started out my career as a family solicitor, I hadn't had the world of divorce or family separation touch my life in a personal capacity. So I arrived fresh-faced with very little in the way of expectation for how divorce and family separation was dealt with by lawyers. And I can remember my supervisor coming over to my desk and handing me something that seems incredibly archaic now, a blue file, and telling me to have a flick through the file to get a sense of the work. And I started reading some of the letters, and I noticed applicant, respondent, my client, your client, and some adjectives used to describe a situation where I didn't think such a strong response was warranted. It seemed disproportionate, and I was struck by some of the terms used, and I remember thinking, well, I'm new to this. These are all lawyers who are way more experienced than me. I'm a lowly trainee, what do I know? So, you know, over the years, as often we do, I became a little bit desensitized, and I'm sure, looking back on some of the letters I wrote at the beginning of my career, I would think, eesh, because I'm sure I could have phrased things better, and we're not experts. We're all learning here, and there's room for improvement for everyone. So I imagine there are others in the virtual room who felt similarly to me. I know we're not all lawyers here, but when you started out in the world of family separation, there may have been terms that jarred, and I'm asking you to tap into your younger selves when you came fresh to this world, and to think about the family law words that you think are harmful to future relationships. And we're going to do this as a word cloud for those that are here for the first one. The Slido access will come up. So if you put your cameras on the QR code, it will come up, and you can start typing in your answers, because we want to hear from you what family law words you consider are harmful to future relationships. And Lauren's going to take us through your responses.
And if you see a word that really sort of resonates with you, do type it in again. You can type in as many words as you want, and the worst offenders are going to get bigger on our screen. I think custody is definitely out the window, and versus. And we certainly found this the easier task. It's much easier to think about the words that get your back up and have made your heart sink over the years. We can see things like my rights, primary carers coming up now, resident parent, my child, not our child. My client, your client has come up a lot as well. Entitlement and winning, it's this battle language. And then the adjectives that Nicole was talking about: shocking, abhorrent, disappointing, the amount of times people have been disappointed. And that's normally the lawyers. Thank you so much for sharing all of these. And we are going to keep track of all of these in the word cloud, and we're going to be reflecting after the session about what else we can change, because everyone has different views on language, and we want to get as many views as possible. I can see there's 11 participants still typing, so I'm going to keep this going for a couple more minutes. I think all of us have probably seen these words used in letters and emails, and had that visceral reaction. You always think, well, if I'm having that reaction, what about the people that we're actually talking about, whose actual lives we're talking about, and the children who are caught in the middle of all of this? Justice and fights. And we talk in the report about use of the term the family justice system, and actually what we're not offering parents justice, we're offering them just process to resolve issues. I'm going to bring this one to a close and ask you the harder question now. What family law words are helpful to family relationships. So hopefully that's popped up on your screen now and you'll be able to type in these words. And what I hope is that they're going to feed into the principles that that Helen's outlined earlier. And again, type in as many words as you want, and the most popular will get bigger. Our children, co-parenting. Working together. You will always be family. I think this really touches upon the positive futures and looking forwards. And problem solving, collaborating, togetherness. Love came up in lots of other, often it just slipped into the background. Solutions, 2 homes I can see, and looking forward to the future. This is going to stay open for a bit longer, so if you do have other words you'd like to share, then please do type them in. And as I say, we will review these after the session. And equally, if you do look at the glossaries that are in the report and there are things that you disagree with or you think you've got better suggestions for, do get in touch with us, because this is the start of a conversation. I'm going to bring this one to a close in a few seconds, but I will be passing over to Kate Daly from Amicable. And Kate's going to be talking about the importance of the language on the gov.uk website and the work she's been doing.
Thank you, Lauren. And hello, everybody. So I'm Kate Daly. I'm from a company called Amicable. And I'm going to share with you the work that Amicable's been doing with the MOJ on gov.uk and the language, and why language on gov.uk is so important. I think Katie's got some bullet points for me. So Katie, can we have the first slide? First bullet point, thank you. So the latest figures from HMCTS, and these really are hot off the press, is that now 73% of people start their divorce on gov.uk. So what that means is, for the majority of people, the majority of citizens, their first kind of experience, their first touch of this kind of language and in a divorce or a separation or a children issue is the government website. So it's absolutely vital that the website is clear and accurate, because so many people are now going there as their very first point of call. So if you think about it, I don't know, even 5 or 10 years ago, pre no fault divorce, pre the government's online digital divorce portal, many more people would have been going to professionals as a first point of call. But now that balance has really shifted. And so it's become really evident from what we've seen at Amicable that an awful lot of people are confused by the wording and the language. If you could pop up the next bullet point, Katie, thank you. And the next one. So the government worked really hard, the MOJ worked really hard on getting the language of the new divorce portal tested and spot on, and as in plain a language as could possibly be. But what wasn't then tested, or there wasn't time to do, was there are many links as you go through the citizen journey that take you back onto the main gov.uk website. And none of that language has been looked at in the context of the change in the law and in the context of changing and simplifying the language on the divorce portal. So there's quite a big disconnect. And there's some really quite basic disconnects that will probably surprise you. So for example, I can't go into all the detail, but one that really struck me was when you get your divorce application through, the notification to say that your application has been accepted by the court, you then get an email that talks about if you need a financial order, and it gives you two choices. It says you can either be in a position where you've agreed your finances, in which case you can have a consent order, or you can be in a situation where you don't agree and therefore it signposts you to the court process. Now, I'm sure all of us on this call would recognize that there is a third major category that we spend most of our time with, which is people who perhaps don't have an agreement right now, but certainly could have an agreement. And it feels really wrong that as a first-time user, you're automatically signposted to the court process at that stage, instead of being signposted to solutions that can help you come to an agreement. So that's quite a simple and basic change that could be put in on the emails that go from the citizen journey to the people who are going through the divorce themselves, to signpost them better and more correctly. And when you go down one or two levels onto the website, there are signpostings, or there is signposting to mediation, but not on that first letter. So there are countless examples of that kind of thing where just some work has been done, but there is still so much more work that could be done. And it's that we're looking at with the Ministry of Justice, and helping them go through on a sort of systematic basis, highlighting where people are confused. And I guess some of the reason that we are able to do that is because as a tech company, we have access to quite a lot of data. And because we are helping people with the citizen journey, we've created a workaround with the Ministry of Justice so that we can help people directly with their government journey, their online government divorce journey. And as a consequence of that, people using the citizen journey are able to feed back directly to us about the concerns and issues that they have. So effectively, we have access to people's queries and people's concerns about where they're not sure what to do and how to go about the next stage. So we collected, for the first 90 days after no fault divorce was brought in, we collected that data and summarized it. And I wrote an article in the Times where some of that was published. And we then fed that back to the Ministry of Justice. So we have an ongoing working relationship trying to change the language and make it simpler for people to access the services and the support they need to be able to move forward. So one of the things I wanted to put out here today was that if anybody has ideas about different bits of the website that they've noticed that are confusing, or where there are obvious changes to the language that could be made, then we have a working relationship and we can feed that information directly into MOJ and the policy team to get those changes made. So please do contact me, email me, or DM me after this meeting, because I'm really keen to make sure that we can change the language so that many more people can be signposted to the right kind of services and keep them out of court. Katie, can we do the next? I think we've covered most of those things. It's not just the links to financial remedy that are confusing, but also the links to anything to do with children. None of those have been looked at in the context of the Language Matters paper or the changes to the law. So there are lots of opportunities to change things for the better for people and make sure that that first point of contact, that first sort of brush with the legal system sounds and feels like the right kind of approach right from the offset. And then we're not having to backtrack and we're not having to play catch up. Thanks. I'm going to hand over to Gillian now, who's going to talk about some of the challenges and some of the things that came up in the last in-person workshop we did. Over to Gillian.
Hello, everyone. It's great so many of you are still with us, still over the 200 mark, which is fantastic. Now, language is challenging, and changing language is even more challenging. We know this from the media still using the term custody when talking about child arrangements. So with every new initiative comes a challenge. And how do we get people to take it up? What are the challenges that get in the way of them taking it up? Chambers Dictionary describes or defines challenge in a number of ways, and the one I like the best is an undertaking to test one's powers and capabilities to the full. It's a bit like running a marathon. It sounds like, to me, facing the fear and doing it anyway. And in this endeavour, we can safely say, along with all those relieved Liverpool fans out there, including Kate, you'll never walk alone, because we are all in this together. Those working in family law, clients, government, media, teachers, doctors, and the general public, we all have to change our language if there is to be lasting change, and that's the real challenge. But quite often we shy away from challenges, and changing our language to a larger degree means changing our culture, and that's huge. Just remember those quotes from the legal directories that we looked at earlier. Manages to terrify the other side. You need shin pads and earmuffs to deal with them. Is that really what the public want for their families? I don't think so. When we had this event in person 2 weeks ago and ran Family Law Hour on Twitter last week, the participants identified some key challenges to changing language. Firstly was the power of the media to form public opinion and the language used. Custody last week was just the obvious example. And in fact, in the Family Law Hour poll that we did last week, 30.4% of those who took part in the poll saw it as the media's responsibility to reframe the language it uses. The second challenge, excuse me, is the lack of clarity as to which government department is responsible for this. We know already that welfare of separating families falls between several stools: justice, education, health, to name but three. Another challenge, the lack of training in key areas, and that I think applies to the judiciary, lawyers, teachers, etc., to train people if they need it as to the impact of the aggressive language that we're trying to dispose of in favour of better language. There was also perhaps realistically a recognition that some lawyers are under huge pressure to hit billing targets and that litigation pays. Litigation pays more than settling a case within 2 or 3 months of being instructed. And so there is some underlying and probably unconscious desire to keep that dispute going. And then there's habit. You know, we just use the language we've always used, and changing our habits, as we probably know from many other areas of our lives, is jolly hard. But changing our language habits are incredibly important, because if we are just habitually using the sort of language that inflames, we are forgetting the very real people who are reading what we say in our correspondence and our position statements. And we're forgetting the very real lives and families who are affected by those words. So now it's your turn. You may have agreed with some of those challenges. You may have plenty of your own that will stop us moving forward, but we want to hear what you think. So on your Slido, you can key in what you think is the thing that mostly gets in the way of progress from the lawyer's perspective, or stab away at the, I shouldn't have, stab is perhaps not the right word there, but if you don't agree with any of those in particular, please put your other words in the chat box so that we've got a record of what the other is, if you like. What is it that stops the lawyers from changing their language? So habit is coming out pretty top on there. Other lawyers, says somebody in chat. I'll try and gather what's being said in chat so that I can share that with you. So other lawyers is coming out there. Any other? How are we doing? I'm just going to keep this. Yes, the way legal accolades are given out, and that's a really important point, because if those lawyers mentioned in those legal directory quotes are the ones who are winning the prizes, and perhaps the ones who are taking silk, you know, it's not really in their interests to dial it down. I'm just going, and lack of training, I completely agree on that score. Fee targets, absolutely. Apathy is getting a bit of a showing there. But habit seems to be the main one. How do we break our habits? We can come on to what we do next shortly. But let's move on to the next poll if we can. I don't know if everyone's had a chance to complete that. So from the client's perspective, what do you think is stopping progress being made? Again, I think that, you know, when you watch TV shows and you see a dramatization of family situations, they're not going to show the ones who sit down around the table and sort it out, because that doesn't make good TV. Not that I'm thinking of the split here, but that certainly was one that had me throwing things at the television. And indeed, you know, that there's shows like EastEnders and all of those shows which, again, for dramatic purposes, show things that perhaps aren't helpful. And I can see that external forces, such as family members and new partners, that's becoming quite, that's getting 46%, which surprises me in a way, because certainly in my experience, I think my own sense is that it's fear, because if we don't be horrible to them, they'll be horrible to us. I remember a client saying to me once on a beauty parade, I want to, you know, rip out their throat before they rip out mine, type of comment. An expectation, because that's how we've always done it, is it the equivalent of habit, if you like. Any more people taking part in this poll? Shall we move on now to the third one, which is what gets in the way of progress from the media, the general public's perspective?
Okay. We'll go this way. Okay. Good.
Somebody needs to mute themselves. That's interesting that there's quite a big push here for lack of education as that being a reason. I think that's fascinating. And how do we educate the media and the general public in a way that they will listen? That seems to me like another big challenge. So do please keep filling in. There's quite a few of you on here. Still, so we'd like to get everybody's answers. I can see that there's a lot of stuff going into chat, which is probably too much for me to kind of keep a track of, but we will keep a track of all of this, and we are recording what everybody's saying in the chat. So when we meet together and take this on to the next stage, we can see what it is you've all said. So don't feel that your comments will be ignored. They won't be. Lack of education still doing really well as the top billing. And that could be education at schools. Maybe this is something that needs to be brought into schools at an early stage, so that, you know, before people even get into those relationships, they can be educated about the impact of language and why this is so important And I'm sure that they will have, you know, these days, I imagine most kids at school will know somebody in their class or their family who's been in this position. So education right from the get-go seems to me to be a very important thing. All right, well, thanks everybody who's taken part in those polls. I think that it's really, really interesting to see what your thoughts are on this, and knowing what challenges are, then it starts making it a bit easier to deal with them and address them in a constructive way. So I'm going to pass you over now to Emma Nash, who's going to talk about what we do next.
Thanks, Gillian. Hi, everyone. And again, just reiterating, thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this today. So what we're going to do, we're going to have one more poll, and then I'm going to talk a bit about some of the things that are being done, and some of the ideas that have already come out of some of these debates about doing this. But I think we're all here, we're all coming to this knowing what the problem is. We've identified, and to use Sir Andrew's words, it's blindingly obvious that this is a problem that we need to sort. The solutions, though, are perhaps not as straightforward in achieving them. And again, to use Gillian's words, the challenges, how do we overcome those challenges? What can we practically do? And there are lots of moving parts to this, because there's lots of different people involved, from the media, the public, to the different sectors of the legal profession, to other professionals, and then you look at the government involvement and other organisations. There's a lot of people involved, and it's up to all of us to play our part in that. But if I can move on to just the last poll we're going to do, we can pull that up, please. There we go. So the question is, who is best placed to make change happen? Now, we're not saying that this is going to fall on one person's shoulders, but we're looking at who's sort of what can make the biggest impact. Okay, so immediately practitioners in the media seem to be winning. Again, these polls are very interesting to see sort of what we get, and one of the reasons for doing the first Slido thing that we did to see who we've got here is that we've got lots of different people here, and lots of different opinions. Practitioners is coming out absolutely on top, followed by the media, and then we've got the judiciary and the government. So the impression is that this is really up to us to lead the way in this. So I think that's coming across loud and clear. Okay, I think that's probably moving on. I'm just moving on now to some of the things that have been done. Clearly, we've talked a lot about that today. We've had the What About Me report. We've then had the Language Matters report, which Helen was talking about earlier. If you haven't read it, it's, I think, essential reading. But lots of other people have been doing lots of other things, and I think that's really where this change is going to happen. One of the things that I've been involved in is setting up the Family Law Language Project, which was very much at the encouragement of the Family Solutions Group. And our idea was, let's get on social media and identify good use of language and bad use of language, but let's do it in a way that's going to correct people and inform people. So, for example, we've had articles come up in the media where they've used that horrible term custody battle, and we've said, hey, hang on, that's not right, and there's a reason why you shouldn't be saying that, because of the damage that it causes, and here's the better term. And actually, we were speaking to some of my committee members for that project earlier today, and we've really noticed, the project's been running for about 15 months now, we've really noticed in recent months, we're getting much more traction on social media. People are tagging us, they are picking up on these things. So that's one of the things that I've been involved in. We've also started, one of the things that's come up, I've seen in the chat a few times, is training. We've been doing training for young lawyers in particular. We delivered training with our family wizard at the YRES conference, which was incredibly interesting. We looked at some examples from relatively what would be considered, I think, benign correspondence, solicitors' correspondence. I think a lot of the words perhaps that we did see about that are damaging did pop up, but how they are how they can be interpreted not just by the clients but by the other lawyers as being aggressive or humiliating, and it's just not helpful. And to actually be feeding that back into young lawyers, and one of the questions that kept coming back was, how do we deal with the older lawyers, with the more experienced lawyers who are giving us this language? So if anyone is out there who is interested in that training, please get in touch. Just want to touch a little bit on one of the ideas that's been mentioned a few times, that because it's come up so much in previous workshop and in discussions, I did want to sort of raise it now. What I will then do, and I can see the chat going crazy, and I probably should have said this a little earlier, is I want to open this up to you guys. What are your ideas? What are your suggestions? Put them in the chat, and I will pick out some of them, and we'll just hopefully be able to talk about them. We won't be able to do very many. Your chat, as Gillian said, will be recorded and we will look at it. But you are here, we want to hear from you. So please put your ideas in the chat. But I did want to talk a little bit about how we can police ourselves. I'm not sure that even that's the right term, but you know, what, how can we either monitor misuse of language, or reward or recognize not just good use of language, but a good approach within the profession. And we've talked about how do we deal with the accolades, the way that the chambers and the directories describe people. But is there another way of promoting the lawyers, the barristers, the people who want to go for silk, who are looking at what they need to get there, and they're thinking, well, I've got to be in court and I've got to, you know, how do I get that, rather than thinking actually what is best for the families involved. So that's something that's absolutely come out, and that's not me saying that, you know, there's not, we're looking for ideas on that. Just to see if we can get something out of the chat. Again, we've come up, you know, reported cases, judgments where the judiciary, well, the judiciary not only using the right language but actually calling out misuse of language. I think we'd all quite like to see that. It's nothing worse than having a position statement or seeing some horrendous language, and we are still seeing it. There's a huge amount of work that needs to be done here, and nothing's done about it. And you've probably worked on that case or been involved with that family and seen the damage that it's done, and there's just absolutely no recognition of that. So we've got a suggestion that says more policing from resolution. Sorry, it's flipping up quite quickly. There has been ideas thrown out about not just resolution, but maybe the SRA, and how there should be a different approach to family law and family lawyers. No other area of law does what we do. No other area of law deals with families in the way that we do, and no other, in the way that we practice, it impacts families, it impacts children directly. As Helen was saying earlier, we've got the proof of that. And yet we are still part of the traditional legal contentious system, both in terms of how we process things and how we present our cases with that horrible verses, but also how we are regulated. And knowing what we know, should there not be some other standard that we are held to, and some teeth to that, or something more? So that's something that's come up as well. Just picking up, requiring families to draft a parenting plan. I think the sooner we can get people thinking in terms of co-parenting and working together is a good suggestion. We've talking about the language that popped up immediately was the word together. I've been doing a lot about language recently, and this is one of the, there's always something new, there's always something to learn every single time, and this is absolutely no exception to that. So anything that we can do to get parents thinking away from that against each other and together mentality. Requirement for the media to consult a family law expert. Sadly, I think that does happen a lot, but I think there's still a lot of issues in the profession that we need to address because they're clearly not getting the right messages. I'm just going to pick one more. Someone has just said that they'd love to get involved. One of the things that the Language Project does is we are very keen to get people getting involved in either our project or other projects. So please do feel free to look us up and get in touch. And I think there is so much scope to speak to people either within our own networks or wider networks about this. I'm just going to round up by saying that in the last 2 years or so, I have done so much work now on the use of language in family law. My own language, my own way of writing, my own way of dealing, not just with clients, but other people, has changed dramatically. And I think, you know, Nicole mentioned look back to the early letters of my career. I will do that probably with horror, but I will also look back only a few years and notice a big change. And the key to that is I've started thinking about it. So if you do nothing else, start thinking about this. Lots more ideas coming up. We're going to go through these later. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Helen now to bring things to an end.
Thanks so much, Emma, and loads of ideas flipping up there in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Sir Andrew, would you like to comment on any of this, apart from the fact that we need soap operas? Do you have anything that you'd like to sort of come in at the end? And now you've seen all the exchange going on.
Well, I think this is extremely exciting and stimulating in the fact that everybody of the 200 or so seem to get their cameras out and take part in the Sligo with vigor. Shows that there is interest and people have got ideas and want to engage with this. It's very exciting. In the speech I gave in Jersey now 15 months or so ago, I said for the remainder of my time as president, I would give my priority to doing what I can to change things to support separating parents, that avoided them either coming to court or when they came to court, things were dealt with in a different way. And that remains my priority. I remain hoping that government will consult on the wider issues that the Family Solutions Group reported on. And I've been pushing for that for many months now. And this too, I think, forms entirely part of that. And I'm very happy, indeed keen to take a national lead on this. And if from these discussions, a list of things that can be done by the judiciary, by me, is drawn up, I'm very happy to take those forward and to encourage everybody to think about this and get on with it. But the real change will come, as has been said across the board this afternoon, by each and every one of us thinking about it. As Emma said, really just thinking about it and then changing practice. I was struck by Nicole's account of her first day at work with the blue file. Blue is probably quite the right colour for it, given what she very politely described she was reading. And we ought to just connect with those first impressions. We've all come to the law first at some stage in our careers, and I think it's right to listen to those and reconnect with those. What we're talking about is changing the world that we work in for the better, for the parents, for the future. So it's very much something that I think those of you who are younger in the profession need to be engaged with. We're rolling the pitch, as it were, for you, for your professional life over the coming decades. And it's very exciting to see that that generation, as well as others at this meeting, are in tune with what we're talking about and wanting to get on with it. I think this is an idea that's found its time. It's been pulled together. I'll use the phrase again I used at the beginning. Once it's all set out, it's blindingly obvious what we should do, and we now just need to get on with it. So hats off to everyone involved with these various projects. And I will do all I can to put my shoulder to the same wheel to bring about as much change as possible. But thank you very much. And thank you all for joining in by watching this webinar this evening and contributing as you have. Thank you, Helen.
Oh, well, a massive thank you to you, Sir Andrew, for getting this whole discussion underway. It was you that said we need to have a paper on language, and you've been very supportive, and it is blindingly obvious, but somehow the blindingly obvious ceases to be blindingly obvious when we all get our heads down into our daily tasks. And so I suppose I have a 3-point call to action as we wind up now. I think first of all is to all of us when we're working with families, and now and until we retire, to remember ourselves what it's like to be a child, and to think about what the experience is for the children of the families that we work with, and to, in a sense, be willing to step into their shoes and have some sense of what they're going through. Secondly, to remember that research, and I find it really helpful. I've got an A5 flyer on it. I give it out to loads of solicitors and others and people I work with and people I come across. It's great. We're enormously grateful to Professor Gordon Harold for summarising it so succinctly. So remember what it's like to be a child, remember the research, and keep on and on talking about it, and talking with colleagues, learning. We're all learning. Our little group, you know, we were picking up each other on language just only yesterday, so we're all learning. None of us are perfect, but keep talking about it, keep it on the agenda, because I think that we'll let down the children if we just let it be one of those things that's interesting for a moment and then drops off. So I think we just all need to keep going, and we look forward to hearing any further thoughts or ideas, and let's keep this conversation alive. Thank you, everyone. And on behalf of all our little group, a massive thank you for engaging so actively. It's been fascinating, and have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.